So we are joined live by Carolyn Heaton, and she is at Banff National Park. She's going to explore a little bit about the conservation and action there and the bison, bringing bison back to Banff National Park. So it's an incredible story. We shared it once before on our platform. We're so excited to have her back. And so without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, Carolyn, and take it away.
Am I on now? Can you hear me?
You're on now, you're good.
Yay! Oh my gosh, what an exciting welcome. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy you're here. Way to bring it this morning.
Yeah. So.
Well, first of all, my name is Caroline Hayden. I work here with Parks Canada as a conservation educator in Banff National Park. And I'm so happy that you guys could all be here today, because we are going to be talking about something very special. We're going behind the scenes to talk about something big and bold that's happening right here in Banff National Park. We are reintroducing North America's largest land mammal to Canada's first national park. Basically, that means that we're bringing bison back to Banff. Now put your hands up if you know what a bison is. Are you kidding? That's amazing.
Everybody knows what a bison is.
Well, for those of you who need a refresher, these are 3 bison in front of you. They're also called buffalo. You can use the same name for both of them. Uh-oh, I'm getting a phone call. You can use the same name for both of them. And as I mentioned, they're North America's largest land mammal. They're huge, they're strong, they evolved during the Ice Age, and they're personally my favorite animal in the whole world. And it also happens that they're not the easiest thing to reintroduce. So today we're gonna go behind the scenes and break down the 5 steps that it takes to bring bison back to Banff after they were missing from the landscape for about 150 years. It's super exciting, and you're gonna see all of the moving parts that make it possible. But first of all, we need to acknowledge that Banff National Park is on the traditional territories of the Treaty 6, 7, and 8 nations, along with the Métis Nation of Alberta. For thousands of years, Indigenous people have traveled through these valleys for sustenance and for ceremony, and we thank them for their stewardship of this beautiful landscape and for sharing the land with us. And this is where our landscape is. Wait for the map to pop up here. So, especially for those of you who are from the States, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is a map of Canada. That's where we are right there in Banff National Park. And this map also shows all of the national parks from coast to coast to coast here in Canada. So it all started right here in Banff. We're the very first national park. We were founded in 1885, which is a really long time ago. And since then, we have grown into a network of protected places. And here in Parks Canada, we have a special job. And that job is to make sure that some of Canada's most special and unique places are protected and healthy and whole. And what that means is that we have scientists in every single one of our parks, and they have a very important job to do. Their job is to monitor the health of our ecosystems, see how things are working. And sometimes that means reintroducing things that are missing. And here in Banff, we were missing something very important. We were missing a keystone species, bison. So sometimes making sure our landscapes are healthy and whole means that we bring back these missing pieces. But not only are we stewards of the land here in Parks Canada, we're also storytellers. So we want to make sure that these places are healthy and whole so that Canadians and visitors, like our friends from the States, can come to these places, whether it's Banff or any other of our national parks, to spend time with your family, to go on a hike, to see the sunrise, and see what makes Canada so special. And if you have visited us here in Banff, this might be a familiar sight. So we are located in the heart of the Rocky Mountains, and we protect a landscape that looks kind of like this. So rugged mountains, glaciers, beautiful alpine lakes. And when people think of Canada, a lot of times they're thinking of a landscape that looks just like this. We also protect several really important species. So we protect, for example, the Rocky Mountain sheep, along with 2 species of bears, not 1, but 2. We have both the black bear and we also have the grizzly bear. Isn't that a cool picture?
Super cool. What a beautiful bear.
I know. And up until recently, this landscape was also home to bison or buffalo. So unfortunately, they disappeared before the park was even created. But we know that they were here from some of the clues that they've left behind. So we've had to look to pieces from the past to tell us about how bison used this landscape. So we've looked at explorers' journals, Indigenous oral history, and pretty cool, we also use archaeology. So we're gonna pop over to our other camera so I can show you something cool that we found.
Perfect.
Did that pop up yet?
Yep, you got the bone.
Great. Perfect. So this is a bison bone, and as you can see, it's pretty big. So I actually found this bone just outside of Banff, or in the town of Banff a couple years ago, and I looked down and knew right away that it was a bison bone. It's, first of all, so giant. So just for scale, you can see how big this thing is. And it also looked really old. So we'll just zoom in here so you can get a better look. So as you can see here, we have this kind of golden coloring. And you can't feel it, but it feels a bit more like a stone than it does a bone. So what we did is we brought this back to our team of archaeologists. And the first thing they did was they actually took a sample. So they cut a piece out of this bone and they powdered it up. And then they sent it away to get some extra testing. So they did some DNA testing to make sure this was really a bison bone. And they also did some carbon dating. And that will tell us how old this bone might be. So we sent it all away and we were really excited and we got the data back. And it turns out that this is indeed a bison bone and it is over 2,000 years old, this very bone. So this is a little piece of history that tells us about the complex way that bison traveled the valleys of what is now Banff National Park. So let's pop back over here.
You're good.
Got it?
Yep.
Great. So not only did bison travel in Banff National Park, but they actually had a huge territory. So this map here shows you the traditional range of the 2 subspecies of bison. So we have the wood bison in the orange and the plains bison in the dark brown. We're only going to be talking about the plains bison today, and that's what we think of when we think of as the buffalo of the Wild West. Their territory was huge. So all the way up to Edmonton, all the way down to Mexico, out to Florida, and we're right here in Banff at the western edge of their traditional range. Now it's hard to imagine, but North America used to look a lot different. So 200 years ago, say you were in what is now Calgary, you could have looked out your window and maybe seen a sight like this. Bison as far as the eye could see. You could hear their footprints shaking the ground. You could smell them in the air. Now this might be a bit of an exaggeration, but at their height, the best estimate we have is about 30 million bison across North America. So that's about the amount of people that live in Canada. And even harder to imagine is that bison nearly went extinct. So in a single human lifetime, we went from 30 million bison to less than 1,000 individual bison. And this photo really says it all. So just take a couple seconds just to look closely at this image and imagine how many bison, so this is all bison skulls, just imagine how many bison are in this pile of bones. So due to habitat loss and overhunting, we very nearly lost bison completely, but thankfully we didn't. And for over a century, Parks Canada has been helping to give bison a second chance. And part of that work means reintroducing bison to parts of their traditional range. So that means Banff. So we started a project to bring bison back to Banff. It's not easy, but this is some of the reasons why it's so important. So first of all, ecology. So bison are keystone species. So that means that they benefit hundreds of other species around them. They help increase biodiversity, and they also help increase the number of habitats in the ecosystem. So they help out bugs and bears and birds. Then, as I mentioned, we are stewards here of the land, but we're also storytellers. So it's important for us to have a story like this that is so full of hope to bring to kids like you across North America, to inspire you guys to be stewards in your own communities. Culture, Indigenous people and bison have coexisted for thousands of years, so connecting people and bison was really important to us. History, we already talked about. Bison belong here. They have roamed this landscape for 10,000 years. And lastly, bringing bison back to Banff is one step of Parks Canada's vision to give bison a brighter future. And this is what it looks like here. So the last wild bison was seen in Banff in the 1870s. And then in 2017, so just a couple of years ago, we started a project to see if it's possible to return wild bison to Banff. So it's a 5-year tester project. And by the end of our project in 2022, we might have 100 bison in our herd. And we'll press pause, we'll look at all of our data, and we'll see if it makes sense to protect bison over the long term. And I'll show you what that looks like. So it all starts with step one. And that step was to get bison from Elk Island National Park, which is another national park just outside of Edmonton. So Elk Island Park protects the seed herd for conservation bison in Canada. So we got a small herd of 16 animals from them. And before we brought them to Banff, we actually gave them some pretty special jewelry. So we're going to pop back over to our camera so I can show you what that looks like.
And you're golden. Perfect.
Great. Okay, so this is a bison horn. So it's different than an antler that you'll see on an elk or a deer, which grow and lose their antlers every year, because bison will keep their horns for their whole life. Now their horns are really special because they're made out of the same thing that our fingernails are made out of. And when it's on a living bison, this horn shield will cover the living bone on the bison's skull. So bison will keep it for their whole lives. And as you can see, we'll just take a closer look here. Bison will grow a new layer every year. So this can also be a really helpful way to get an idea of how old a bison might be. Pretty cool. Feels kind of like a cheese grater. Now, if we go to the other side here, you'll see that the end of the horn is pretty pokey. And sometimes even when they don't mean to, bison can accidentally poke each other. And we wanted to make sure that all of our bison arrived safe and sound. So what we did is we used some state-of-the-art conservation technology, duct tape. While we were doing some disease testing to make sure our bison were healthy, we actually took some essentially garden hose and we duct taped it to the end of their horn, just like this. This is actually a tube that we used as part of our project, so that when bison bumped into each other, instead of a sharp horn, they got a squishy tube, which ended up working super well, very low tech, but all of our bison arrived safe and sound. So after we gave our bison their special jewelry, we actually loaded them up into these special containers you can see on the back of these trucks. They're all full of bison, and we had this fleet of bison trucks, and we started about a 7-hour road trip that took us from Elk Island all the way down to the border of Banff National Park. It's not so often you get to go on a road trip with a whole herd of bison. And once we arrived there, we had a challenge because where we're bringing the bison, there was no road access. So a helicopter came and plucked each of the containers off of the back of the trucks and flew the bison in the air over the mountains. It was super cool. We had a GoPro mounted in the containers to make sure the bison were happy. And as you can see from our footage, they were so relaxed, so calm, no big deal. But I'm sure it was still a weird experience for them because it's not every day that bison get to fly over the mountains. And here you can see the horn tubes in action. So when all of the boxes arrived on site, we carefully opened all of the doors of those containers, and the bison took the very first steps that bison have taken in Banff National Park in 150 years. A very cool day for conservation. And then that brought us to step 2, which was to care for the herd. So what we did is kind of the training wheels version of a reintroduction. So we held the bison in a fenced pasture to allow them to get used to living in the mountains because they had a lot to learn. So this is the pasture that we kept them in. And for a year and a half, our staff had the coolest job in the whole world. Their job was to monitor the herd, make sure that they were happy and healthy, and they actually got to know them as individual bison, which is pretty neat. And during that time, the cows of the herd gave birth to 20 baby calves, and they're the cutest things in the whole world. They come out bright orange, they're so curious, and pretty much right away, they're up and keeping up with their mom. And while they were in this pasture, they had some things to learn about living in the mountains. So they had never seen a river before. So they had to learn how to cross the river, how to drink from the river, but they figured it out in no time. So in this picture, that's one of the very first times that wild bison have crossed a river on this landscape in a very long time. And they also had to gain some mountain muscle. So in this picture, that is a 1-day-old calf keeping up with its mom, no problem. And lastly, before we released them, we gave all the adults really cool GPS collars so we could track their movements over the landscape. I'll show you what that looks like in just a little bit. And then that brought us to the third step, the big day, which was to release the bison into the wild. So this happened last summer. I got to be part of it, and it was so cool to be there in that moment where we cut the fence open to give the herd their freedom. Now, we were so excited, our stomach was full of butterflies, and we stood back and we waited. The bison are taking a nap. We waited. We just thought that they would smell the opening and leave the enclosure. But time passed, and we waited, and we waited. Eventually, we had to go to bed because it was nighttime. But sure enough, in the middle of the night, the herd all left the pasture and out into the wild, like a midnight jailbreak. And this is the landscape that they emerged into, one of the most remote, rugged places in Banff National Park, where you're more likely to see a wolf than you are another human being. So we went out there the next morning to try to find where they went. So we scanned the valleys, couldn't see them. And then we started looking up, way up. And we found bison underneath that red circle. Isn't that crazy? So that's 2 cows and their 2 2-day-old calves. Totally blew our minds. And they stayed on that ridge for about 2 weeks, just eating the tiniest little bits of grass. So now I'm going to need a classroom volunteer for our next slide. Jesse, can you help me out?
I sure can. All right, so Miss McNeil's class, we'll go to you guys. Do you want them unmuted now, or do you want to ask a question first?
I'm going to ask the question. So I just need one volunteer
Okay.
to play hot and cold with me and point out where the bison are hidden on this picture. Does everyone see my mouse here?
Yeah, we can see your mouse.
Okay,
So Miss
perfect.
McNeil's class, whoever wants to play along, go for it. Okay. Go right ahead, Carolyn.
Okay, tell me if I'm getting hotter or colder.
What do you guys think? Closer to the bison or further away? Further, further.
Further? You think they're over here?
Closer.
Over this way?
Hotter.
Higher?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, am I getting closer?
Yeah, just hotter.
How hot am I?
Very hot.
Ah!
Perfect. Okay.
Nice work. You found them. So they're not rocks. That's really a herd of bison on a mountain face. Pretty unbelievable. And so now they've been in the wild for a year, and every single day we come to the office and it feels like we are discovering a new species. They're spending most of their time in habitat we never dreamed that they would be traveling. So this is the herd up on a high mountain pass. And what we're seeing kind of 2 summers in here is that as soon as the snow melts, they are getting as high up on the mountain as they possibly can and staying there all summer long until the snow pushes them down again. Kind of like in the same habitat that you would find mountain goats. Pretty wild. So they made it through their first winter without any help from us, and they're getting ready for their second winter here. And we're just so impressed by them. Like, this is a photo that was taken just a few weeks ago, and you can just see how healthy they are. Their coats are gleaming. They had 2 new calves, and they're finding the meadows, and using this backcountry area in the same way that their ancestors might have for thousands of years. Which brings us to step number 4, which is the step that we are in right now, learning from the herd. So for the first half of this project, we were really guiding the bison as they learned to explore their new home range. And now the relationship's flipped. So every single day, we're learning something new from them. So we send our team out every couple of weeks or so on horses or on foot or on skis to see the animals in their ecosystem, in their new home. So a major tool that we use to find them is telemetry. So remember those GPS collars? So as you remember, we gave each of our bison a radio collar. And these are really special collars because each one gives off a unique signal, which is kind of like the bison's own radio station. They're all unique to each other. So what we can do is we can go into the field with what's called a telemetry receiver. And that will pick up the different radio stations of the bison. And using that, we can see where it's coming from, where it's loudest, and get an idea of where the bison might be. So then once we have that better idea, we can get as close as we need to get the observation data that we are looking for, which is like how healthy they are, what their behaviors are like. And over time, that will give us an idea of how the herd is adapting to their new home. Did the video finish for everybody?
Yeah, it's perfect.
Okay. So we can use that in the field, but we can also log onto our computers and we can see the GPS uploads of where the herd has been. So I know this video is a little choppy because there's just so much information. But what you're seeing here is the GPS data from 6 months of bison from the time that they were released. So what's really neat about this is we can see the exact areas that the bison are traveling through and spending time. Now, as time passes, we'll be able to layer that data and get a better understanding of how the bison are traveling this place. And we can ask questions like, where do bison go in different seasons? Which bison is leading the herd? And how do bison interact with other wildlife on the landscape? So because we also have other animals that are collared, like several wolves, so we can see over time how they're interacting. Pretty neat. And what our data is showing us so far, that's where we want the bison to adopt as their new home range, is that they're spending time in that northern section of their protected area. So over the next few years of the project, we're hoping that they'll travel south and really experience that full light green area that they have access to. I actually got a chance to go into one of these valleys where the bison have been grazing and spending time. And there weren't any bison there at the time, but I walked into this meadow and it just hit me in the face. They have this deep earthy smell. I looked down, you could see all these bison patties that you can see in this photo. There was new fresh grass coming up from the bison grazing. There were ground squirrels chirping, there was fur left on the trees. And it just felt that there was this beautiful dance that was happening out there. An old dance that had been happening for hundreds and thousands of years and had been quiet for so long. And it was incredible to see this richness that bison can bring back to this place happening right before my eyes. And best of all, it was so cool to look down on a trail and be walking on the footsteps of a bison and basically seeing the impossible happening right in front of you, because bison had been gone for so long, and to actually see them, like a sign of them right there under your foot, is such a rewarding thing, because we really are reintroducing bison to a place where they belong. Which brings us to our last step, step number 5, which is your step, which is to follow the herd. So our bison are on an exciting journey. We want you guys to be part of it. So we have a few ways that you can learn more. This past year, we actually sent our scientists out into the field with a camera to record the day-to-day of living with the herd. And from that, we made a 5-part web series. It's all on our YouTube channel. We'll send you links to all this, and we'll also link it below. We'll talk about that after. So our challenge to you is, as a class, watch all of the series. Each episode's about 5 minutes long, and choose your favorite episode and tell us why. Then you can share it on social media. You can tag us at BanffNP, use the hashtag BanffBison, and we'll get back to you with a story from one of our scientists that were featured in the web series about one of their favorite moments out there with the bison. And part B, as weather permits, fingers crossed, we have another session here with Explorer where we're actually going to take what we've just learned here in the classroom out into the field. So that's happening on October 23rd. Sign up or stream it because you'll be able to see what that data collection actually looks like out in the field.